Make me walk. Arthur Calloway's voice cut across the driveway like a blade. Truly walk, not shuffle, not lean, walk like a man. Do that, and I'll sign this mansion over to you tonight. He lifted a golden key, and the July sun caught it like a performance. Then he laughed. Loud, sharp, certain. The laugh of a man who had never once doubted the limits of other people. His son Carter, his daughter-in-law, 3 associates in summer linen. All of them laughed. The sound bounced off the limestone face of the estate, like a verdict already written. Nobody moved, because nobody believed it was a real offer. And then a boy stepped forward, 14 years old. Jeans faded at both knees. A yellow shirt washed so many times the color had become old paper. Soil under his fingernails from garden beds. He had worked since 7 that morning. He was a gardener's son, and he looked every bit of it. He had no business near a golden key or 31 people in Italian shoes. But he was not looking at Arthur's face. He was not looking at the key. His eyes were locked on Arthur Calloway's left foot. No one else in that crowd of 31 was watching Arthur Calloway's left foot, but Miguel Santos was. In the 3 seconds before the laughter died, Arthur's wheelchair rolled forward. The left wheel caught a crack in the cobblestone, and Arthur's left foot moved 2 millimeters. A reflex so small it barely existed. A whisper from a body everyone had decided was finished. Miguel's eyes went still. Something locked behind them. He had just seen what 3 neurologists at Cedars-Sinai had missed across 14 months and 12 MRIs. And what he was about to do would either give this man his life back or cost his own family everything they had quietly spent 15 years building. He had seen something in that single reflex that no machine had caught and no doctor had thought to test for. And in about 60 seconds, he was going to walk across that cobblestone driveway and prove it, in front of 31 people who had already decided who he was. If you have ever been told that what you carry means nothing, stay right here, because what this boy knew and how he came to know it is something you will not see coming. Subscribe now and don't go anywhere. But to understand what Miguel saw, you have to understand what that wheelchair had already cost a man sitting in it. Rewind. January 3rd, 2018, 6:47 in the morning. Balboa Peninsula, Newport Beach. Arthur Calloway was walking his route. 3 miles, same path, same pace. A routine he had kept without interruption for 40 years. He had built his first oil contract at 31. By 55, he owned more California real estate than most men could name. He walked into every room like he had personally approved the floor beneath his feet. And every morning, before the city fully woke, he walked this peninsula like a man who believed the ground owed him something. At mile 2, between the boardwalk and the water, he collapsed. No warning, no stumble first. Just down, the way a building comes down when its foundation gives without notice. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. Dr. Raymond Holt, chief of neurology, delivered the findings 11 days later. Massive ischemic stroke. Significant compression of the L4-L5 vertebral disc, compounded by post-stroke spasticity. Prognosis for independent ambulation, less than 4%. 14 months of physical therapy followed, twice a week, then 3 times, then every day for a month. Nothing changed. The left leg stayed silent. The wheelchair stayed. What the medical reports did not record was what the wheelchair did to Arthur Calloway's identity. This was a man who had watched competitors, employees, and adversaries for 50 years, and his single sharpest skill was reading the room. So when his children began visiting more frequently after the stroke, he noticed immediately what kind of visits they were. Quiet, careful, eyes moving across rooms, resting on objects, calculating without meaning to. He had watched men circle wounded animals his entire career. He recognized the circling now. He said nothing. He just watched back. Only one person on his estate never changed. Roberto Santos, the groundskeeper, arrived from Cebu City, Philippines in 2004, had maintained the Calloway property for 15 years. He trimmed the same hedges with the same care, whether Arthur was watching from the window or not. One night, 3 months after the stroke, Roberto passed Arthur's study at 2 in the morning and saw the light still on. He did not knock. He did not speak. He left a cup of coffee outside the door and walked back to the garden cottage where he and his son Miguel slept. Arthur found it in the morning. He never mentioned it. Neither did Roberto. But he remembered what Arthur Calloway never knew. What Roberto had never told a single person on that estate was that before he became a groundskeeper, his father back in Cebu had been the most sought-after healer in their entire province. And he had taught his grandson everything. Every single thing he knew. The summer of 2016 was the last summer Miguel Santos spent in Cebu City. He was 11 years old. His father had saved enough to send him for 3 months to visit family, to remember where he came from, to spend time with his grandfather before age made the distance impossible. What Roberto did not tell his son was that he already knew, somewhere quiet inside him, that it would be the last time. Lolo carding's hands were the first thing Miguel noticed, gnarled at every knuckle, slow when they reached for a cup or turn a page. But when someone came through the door in pain, when a fisherman sat down in that small wooden room that smelled of eucalyptus oil and dried herbs, those hands became something different entirely. They moved with a precision that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with knowing. Miguel sat in the corner of that room every single day that summer. He did not play outside. He did not ask to leave. He watched and he drew. His notebook from that summer still exists. 43 pages of hand-drawn diagrams. The human spine from 4 angles, nerve pathways mapped in ballpoint pen, pressure points marked with small numbered circles, margin notes in a mix of English and Cebuano that only Miguel could fully read. He was 11. He drew like someone who was afraid of forgetting. Lolo carding's technique was called Highlight, a traditional Filipino healing practice passed through generations of the Santos family. Not mysticism. Anatomy, applied through hands trained to feel what instruments measured. He taught Miguel that nerves do not die easily. They go silent. And silence, he said, is not the same thing as absence. The body, when it loses a signal, does not erase the path. It simply stops sending. The pathway remains. It waits. The diagnostic key. The thing Lolo carding pressed into Miguel with specific, deliberate repetition was this: a so-called paralyzed limb, when subjected to sudden vibration or unexpected surface change beneath it, will often produce an involuntary micromovement if the nerve channel is compressed rather than severed, 1 to 2 millimeters, sometimes less. The muscle fires because the pathway still exists. It cannot help itself. Miguel wrote it down in his notebook exactly as his grandfather said it. Look for the foot that the patient doesn't know is still listening. In September that same year, 2 weeks after Miguel returned to Newport Beach, Roberto called him into the kitchen and told him quietly that Lolo carding had died in his sleep. Miguel did not cry immediately. He sat down at the table, opened a notebook, and kept drawing, because that was what his grandfather had taught him to do with something worth keeping. You write it down before the feeling of it fades. You do not let it become only a memory. You make it into something you can use. He carried that notebook back to Newport Beach in his backpack. Over the next 3 years, he added to it. He read anatomy textbooks from the school library. He watched physical therapy sessions on YouTube and compared what he saw to what Lolo carding had shown him. And every weekend, when he helped his father on the Calloway estate, he watched Arthur Calloway being wheeled past the rose beds. He noticed, across 8 months of quiet observation, that Arthur's left foot always rested at a slightly different angle than his right, that on smooth ground it stayed still. But on uneven terrain, gravel, cracked concrete, the lip between the driveway and the grass, it moved. Not much, just enough for someone who knew exactly what to look for. He said nothing. He was a gardener's son. Nobody asked the gardener's son. But on July 14th, 2019, when Arthur Calloway raised that golden key above his head and 31 people laughed, Miguel Santos watched the wheelchair will catch the cobblestone crack, watched the foot move its 2 silent millimeters, and understood something with complete and total clarity. Arthur Calloway was not paralyzed. He was compressed. And every single thing Lolo carding had ever taught him had been building, without either of them knowing it, toward this one driveway, this one afternoon, this one man. The laughter was fading. The moment was supposed to be over. Carter Calloway had already pulled out his phone, already moved on in his mind. The associates were drifting back toward the entrance. Arthur lowered the golden key and settled back into the wheelchair the way a man settles into something he has stopped fighting. 31 seconds had passed since the challenge. Nobody had moved forward. Nobody was going to. And then Roberto Santos felt his son step out from behind him. He grabbed Miguel's shoulder with both hands. His grip was tight, urgent. The grip of a man who had spent 15 years learning exactly how much space he was allowed to occupy and exactly what happened when you asked for more. Miguel! His voice was low, almost a whisper. No, these are not our people. This is not our fight. Miguel turned and looked at his father. Really looked. At the tiredness behind his eyes, at the permanent apology in the way he held his shoulders, at 15 years of making himself smaller written into every line of his face. He placed his hand over his father's and gently, firmly, moved it from his shoulder. Then he turned back toward Arthur Calloway and walked forward, 12 steps across the cobblestone. The crowd noticed immediately. The laughter that had almost fully died came back, smaller now, sharper. Carter looked up from his phone. Is that Roberto's kid? His wife took a half step back. One of the associates smiled the way people smile when they are watching something they expect to end badly. A security guard near the entrance moved 1 foot forward, reading the room. Arthur Calloway raised a single hand, not beckoning, not welcoming, just stopping. Curious, the way a man is curious about something that briefly interrupts his boredom. Well, he said, his voice carrying particular flatness of someone who has run out of things to surprise him. Come on then. I haven't got all day. Miguel stopped in front of the wheelchair. He crouched down until he was at eye level with Arthur's knees. He did not ask permission. He placed 2 fingers gently on Arthur's left ankle and held them there without moving. The crowd went quiet in the way crowds go quiet when something unexpected becomes something real. Arthur's instinct was to pull back. Instead, he heard himself say, "You gonna check my pulse? I'm not dead yet." A few people laughed. Miguel did not. He moved his fingers slowly upward, pressing at the base of Arthur's calf, 3 inches below the fibular head. The precise location of the peroneal nerve junction, exactly where Lolo Carding had marked in the notebook margin with a small red circle and the word gateway. Arthur's jaw tightened, not from pain, from something he hadn't felt in 14 months. Sensation moving through a place that had been quiet so long he had stopped believing it existed. Arthur stopped. Frowned. That's strange. Miguel moved both hands to the base of Arthur's spine. L4, L5. He pressed with his thumbs, steady and specific, and held the pressure without moving. At the far edge of the crowd, Dr. Sarah Wren, Arthur's personal physician, who had overseen every therapy session for 14 months, pulled out her phone and opened Arthur's MRI file. She scrolled to the L4 notation. She read it. She read it again. Something shifted in her face that she was not able to fully conceal. Carter stepped forward. Okay, that is enough. Dad, this kid is not. Carter. Arthur's voice came out quiet and completely level. Stop talking. Carter stopped, because that voice, that particular unhurried, immovable voice, had not come out as father in 14 months. The associates exchanged glances. Roberto Santos, standing at the edge of the driveway, pressed one hand flat against his chest. Miguel spoke for the first time since he had stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He spoke directly to Arthur, low enough that only the two of them could fully hear it. Your nerve isn't gone, sir. It's been compressed since the stroke. The disc at L4 rotated 4 degrees on impact. Every therapy session you've had has been treating the wrong vertebral level. The driveway was completely silent. Dr. Sarah Wren looked up slowly from her phone screen. She did not speak. She looked at this 14-year-old boy crouched in front of a wheelchair on a cobblestone driveway, and she did not speak. Arthur Calloway studied Miguel's face for a long moment. This boy with soil under his nails and worn sandals on a driveway that could have bought a city block. He had spent 50 years reading people in boardrooms and across negotiating tables, reading the difference between someone who had something real and someone performing the idea of it. And what he saw in this boy's face was the one thing he had never been able to manufacture or purchase across 78 years of trying. Certainty. What if you're wrong? Arthur asked, Miguel held his gaze without blinking. What if I'm right? Arthur was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then something moved across his face. Not hope exactly, because hope had been taken from him too many times in 14 months to arrive easily. Something older than hope. Something closer to the feeling a man gets when he finally allows himself to admit that he has not yet run out of road. Show me, he said. 2 words. The 2 words nobody in that family had ever heard Arthur Calloway say to someone standing in worn sandals on his driveway. Carter's mouth opened and closed. Roberto Santos dropped his head and covered his eyes with one hand. And Miguel Santos rose from his crouch, steadied himself, and began to do the one thing his grandfather had spent an entire summer teaching him. Quietly, completely, in front of everyone who had already decided it was impossible. Miguel worked for 23 minutes. He did not rush. He did not perform. He followed Lolo carding sequence the way his grandfather had drilled it into him across that summer in Cebu. Not as a series of steps to remember, but as a single continuous conversation between 2 hands and a body that had forgotten how to speak. He began with spinal traction, both hands flat beneath Arthur's lumbar. Fingers spread, a slow, sustained upward pull that lasted 90 seconds without variation. Arthur gripped the armrest of the wheelchair and said nothing. The crowd, which had been murmuring steadily since Miguel stood up, went quiet within the first 30 seconds. Something in the stillness of Miguel's face made noise feel wrong. At minute 4, he moved to the peroneal nerve junction, the same pressure point Lolo carding had marked with a red circle in the notebook and described using the branching root of papaya tree as a visual map. Thumb pressure, rotating clockwise, sustained and measured. Arthur's breathing slowed without him seeming to notice it had changed. His grip on the armrest loosened slightly. Finger by finger, the way a man releases something he's been holding so long, he forgot he was holding it. At minute 9, Miguel repositioned Arthur's left leg to a 34-degree angle and held it. His arms were shaking with the effort, but his hands stayed completely steady. That was the thing Lolo carding had taught him that no textbook had. The hands and the arms are different instruments. The arms can tire. The hands must not. At minute 11, Arthur Calloway's left foot flexed. Visibly, fully, undeniably. Dr. Sarah Wren stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, without meaning to. The word that came out of her was barely audible. Oh my God! Arthur felt it before he saw it. A current moving through a channel that had been dry for 431 days. His eyes went wide. His voice came out stripped of everything he usually kept wrapped around it. Did I just... Don't move yet, Miguel said quietly. 3 more minutes. Arthur Calloway, who had not taken instruction from another human being, without negotiating it first in 30 years, went still and waited. At minute 23, Miguel stepped back. He looked at Arthur and said simply, now, slowly, just try. Arthur placed both hands on the wheelchair arms. He had tried to stand exactly like this in physical therapy sessions more times than he had counted, failed every time. This time, his left leg pushed, and the resistance that had lived in that joint for 14 months was gone. Cleanly, completely. As though a door had been unlocked from the other side. He rose, shaking but rising. He took 1 step on the cobblestone, then another. Carter Calloway, 47 years old, and not a man who showed anything in front of an audience, covered his face with both hands. Roberto Santos went to his knees on the driveway. Silently, the way a man kneels when a feeling is too large for standing. Arthur walked 4 steps, then turned. He stood in front of Miguel Santos. This boy, the gardener's son, worn sandals, old paper shirt, and extended the golden key without a word. Miguel looked at it. Then he shook his head slowly. I didn't come for the mansion, sir. Arthur stood on his own 2 feet for the first time in 431 days. Holding a golden key that a 14-year-old boy had just refused, and asked the only question he had left. Then what did you come for? Miguel looked past him, across the cobblestone, to his father still on his knees at the edge of the driveway, and said something so quiet and so simple that it took Arthur Calloway a full minute standing there in the July heat to understand what it had cost that boy to say it out loud. If this moment is hitting you somewhere real, you already know why this story matters. subscribe and stay. Because what Miguel said, and what Arthur Calloway did with the rest of his life because of it, is the part that nobody talks about. I came so my father could stop apologizing for existing. The words landed on Arthur Calloway the way quiet things land on a man who spent his entire life surrounded by noise. Slowly, and then all at once, he stood on the cobblestone driveway, still steadying himself, and turned to look at Roberto Santos. Really look, 15 years. 15 years this man had maintained his grounds, trimmed his hedges, left coffee outside his study door at 2 a.m, without being asked and without expecting acknowledgement. And Arthur Calloway, who prided himself on reading people, realized with a particular shame of the genuinely intelligent that he had never once learned Roberto Santos's last name. He had known the garden. He had not known the gardener. In the days that followed, Dr. Sarah Wren pulled Arthur's complete imaging history and re-examined every MRI with a radiologist she trusted. The confirmation came back inside 48 hours. L4 disc rotational compression. 4 degrees. Exactly as Miguel had said. 14 months of therapy had been targeted at the wrong vertebral level. She sat alone in her office for a long time before she made any phone calls. Some reckonings are not loud. They arrive quietly and stay. Carter Calloway did not make a public statement. He was not seen at the estate for 5 days. On the 6th day, he came back alone, without his wife, without his phone, and had lunch with his father on the back terrace for the first time in 3 years. Neither of them referenced what had happened on the driveway. They didn't need to. Some repairs don't require words. They just require presence. Arthur did not give Miguel the mansion. He did something that would matter far longer than property ever could. He called the principal of Miguel's school the following Monday morning. He contacted a medical research foundation in Manila by Wednesday. And on Thursday evening, for the first time in 15 years, he asked Roberto Santos to sit down at his dinner table. Roberto thought there had been a mistake. He came anyway. Arthur looked across the table at the man who had left coffee outside his door, without a word, and said simply, "I have wasted 15 years of good company. But the real ending of this story isn't what Arthur gave Miguel. It isn't the school's sponsorship or the research grant or the dinner that went 3 hours longer than either man expected. The real ending is what Miguel gave back, to a tradition, to a people, and to a word the world had quietly forgotten how to say. Miguel Santos enrolled in pre-med at UC Irvine in the fall of 2023. His undergraduate thesis, submitted in his first year, was titled Traditional Filipino Highlight Nerve Compression Therapy, a Clinical Study of Documented Cases, 1940 to 2020. His faculty advisor, a woman who had reviewed first-year undergraduate work for 19 years, called it the most original thesis she had read in 2 decades. She asked him where the research began. He told her about a small wooden room in Cebu City that smelled of eucalyptus oil and dried herbs, about a man with gnarled hands who moved them like he was listening to something no instrument could hear, about a notebook with 43 pages of hand-drawn diagrams that still lived in the bottom drawer of his desk. Roberto Santos no longer trims hedges at the Calloway estate. He manages it. Same man. Different chair at the table. He still makes coffee at 6 a.m. out of habit. These days, Arthur Calloway comes to the kitchen to drink it with him. In a village outside Cebu City, a small sign hangs above the entrance to a community health post. It reads, Carding Santos Hyla Healing Center. Funded by the Calloway Foundation. Built on land donated without a name attached to the donation. Lolo Carding never asked to be remembered. He was remembered anyway. The boy with soil under his nails and worn sandals on polished cobblestone did not walk into that driveway looking for a mansion. He walked in carrying something heavier and rarer. The knowledge that silence is not the same as absence, and that the most powerful things in this world are almost always found in the hands it overlooks. If this story reminded you of someone who carried something quietly, someone the world walked past without stopping, share this right now. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it today. Because this is what we do here. We tell the stories that never got told, and we make sure the right people are never forgotten again.